Hello and welcome to Practical Inclusion for the last episode of this series for 2020. Certainly we'll be back again next year and already have a whole bunch of guests lined up that I think you're going to love. So don't be sad. I will be back in January with more of these shows. But I am very, very excited today to be able to end 2020 talking to someone who I have certainly admired and watched their journey throughout, I guess, working in a similar space to me as a consultant in diversity and inclusion, or specifically around intersectionality, which we're going to talk about today. Before I introduce Budi, we're going to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which I broadcast from today, which is the land of the Wadawurrung people, and pay my respect to their elders, past, present and emerging. And of course, it always was and always will be Aboriginal land. Budi, whose lands are you broadcasting from today?
Thank you, Bree. And I do want to acknowledge the custodian of the land that I'm broadcasting from, so the Boonwurrung and the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, and pay my respect to the elders, past, present, emerging, and also anyone that's watching this at the moment and is also watching the recording.
Beautiful. Thank you. So I'm going to do the usual thing. You're going to introduce yourself. I first came across you, I think you were sitting on a panel in an EON event. And so for those of you who haven't got wind of EON yet, that's EEON. I think it's Equal Employment Opportunity Network.
That's correct.
It is a fantastic network that provides some incredible events during the year that members can go along to and others can go along and pay to attend as well. And they really tackle the difficult issues in the diversity and inclusion space. So I would recommend hooking up to EON if you haven't. So I attended one of those events and saw Budi, and he really did open up my mind to some things that at the time I really wasn't across yet. So I'm hoping and I'm sure we're going to do exactly the same thing today. Budi, can you introduce yourself, perhaps by telling us a little bit about your story, how you got into doing this work, and why you're so passionate about it?
Oh, look, I think anyone who works in diversity and inclusion, we just found ourselves doing it. We either have experienced some sort of exclusion, we have experienced some sort of discrimination, either through our own personal life, in the workplace, our own social life. So when we see a channel to do something about it, I think all of us that working in this sector kind of gravitated towards that channel. So for me, it's really about coming to the term diversity quite late in my when I was working in an organization, and realized that there's a lot of work that still needs to be done to really unpack this concept of diversity. What is the power structure that actually prohibit the implementation of diversity and inclusion? And that's something that I really get passionate about, talking about the power structure, talking about the systemic change, talking about the legacy of discrimination and marginalization that we inherited and how to challenge that. And of course, intersectionality as well. Given that I am not white, so, I got my race, I got my ethnicity, I have my faith, my sexuality, my gender identity, and all of that kind of combined together, and how to place intersectionality within the diversity concept. So it's been a journey, and just like you, I'm still learning. It's every day, it's a new learning journey. Every day there's something pop up in my email, and I'm like, oh, I haven't thought about that. Let me have a look at it. So but it's good.
It sometimes feels that information overload in this space, doesn't it? Because as you say, every day there's something new to learn. I
don't think it is information overload. I think, and there's one thing that I like about this sector. It's very dynamic. It's always changing with times. There's new changes. There's new challenges. And I'm the kind of person who got bored when things becomes too static and too predictable. I'm like, no, give me something else. I'm good at that. I've done that. I managed to do it. I know what I need to know from that part. So let's move on to something else. So I like it. It's always changing.
Yeah, fantastic. No, I totally relate to that as well. I want to touch back on, you talked about the power structures, and you and I have a similar approach, I think, in this space, and certainly my training always starts off with conversations about privilege and power, and what responsibility perhaps that brings for people, and what impacts that has on the way people interact in situations, and particularly in the workplace. Can you maybe kind of further give us a bit more meat around that topic? Because I think for many, as you've said in one of your blog articles, I think that for many, diversity does come down to counting the number of women in leadership roles, or counting how many internships we offer for people with disability, or it becomes a numbers game. And I'm certainly a real advocate for data in this space, but I really liked what you wrote in that blog around power, and how perhaps we need to think more broadly than data.
So it's been an interesting journey for me as well. I mean, it's interesting learning journey that, when we talk about diversity, there's a conversation about power is often got sidelined. People don't like to talk about power and diversity. And for me, that's because the concept diversity in itself has been created by people who hold the systemic power. So if we can imagine this group of people who has access to financial security, to political influence, who can easily relate to someone who they see on television, in the print, in the social media, that's a sense of power. So when we talk about diversity, the way it has been constructed so far is always about the others. So we are fine over here. We got the power, we got the influence. Oh, hang on a second. We have to include people who are not the same as us. That in itself is problematic, because then people are being seen, instead of celebrating the natural fact that humans are diverse, we are implementing a certain power system where the dominant group is actually dictating who should be included in this conversation. Yeah. So when I talk about gender equity, I kind of reflect on the work that has been done by a lot of strong women of color. Kimberly Crenshaw, the one that used the term intersectionality, like in a proper kind of academic way, who are kind of challenging that power system. Well, it's not enough to have gender equity when the gender equity replicate the racism that Black women face. And this is also my criticism about the way intersectionality has been framed in Australia, because it has been whitewashed. People don't recognize the origin of intersectionality coming from a Black feminist movement. And that's because it feels uncomfortable for us to admit that even though we may have been marginalized based on gender, but at the same time, we can also be compliant to the system of racism. We can be compliant. We can follow the system of queerphobia and heterosexism as well. So power is important to understand and to unpack. What is the system that has been created when we talk about diversity and inclusion? Who's in the power to dictate which diverse group that we're going to include at the moment? And once we set up that diverse group, like you said, you and I had this conversation before this, let's say gender. That's the main thing. Organizations like to say, oh, we are diverse because we have a gender equity working group. Does that gender working equity group replicate heterosexism, racism, classism, ableism? So we have to keep constantly asking ourselves, are we being inclusion? Are we being inclusive, or is it just something that we put in so we look like we are inclusive, but actually we're excluding a whole lot of people from within one group? Sorry, I use a lot of my hand because it's just how I talk.
I like it. So I want to touch on that, because there's quite often this idea that if you haven't benefited from, if you've experienced hardship in some way, then you haven't benefited from privilege. And I think people get this concept that, yeah, sure, I am white, but I'm a woman and I've had significant barriers towards my career progression, which can be entirely true, that they therefore have, can put themselves in the shoes of people quite readily that actually face maybe other more significant barriers or added barriers, compounded barriers.
I think you nail it there. I think in your reflection, and look, I can't speak on behalf of on gender because I do have that privilege, and I'm sorry to be a bit blunt, but I was born with a penis, and that automatically put me ahead of my cousins who were born with a vulva. That automatically put me ahead. So it is inherited. It is something that I did not ask, but it's given to me through the power system. Yeah. So when we talk about marginalization, and quite often I have to keep reminding myself of this. Yes, I have experienced homophobia. I have experienced racism. I have experienced Islamophobia. At the same time, I also have a lot of privilege. Talking to you right now using English, I stumble with English, but being able to communicate using English, having a tertiary education, in my case, being able to live overseas, away from my family, without any concern about my safety, that privilege must be understood and it must be recognized, because otherwise, I will just put myself in the victimhood kind of state of mind. And this is dangerous because when I find myself in a victimhood state of mind, I forget that I am actually also subscribing to the same power dynamics that put me in a marginalized situation. I forget to listen to the voices of people who haven't been given a voice yet. People whose English is not their first language. People who's from asylum seekers, from refugee backgrounds, trans women of color and trans men of color as well. So it's all about understanding that marginalization and privilege is not the opposite end of the spectrum. Intersectionality is about recognizing that they exist, they coexist. We have experiencing marginalization in one hand at the same time. Bree, like if you're a white person, then you are benefiting from the system of racism as well. Yeah. As someone who's born a male, I'm benefiting from the system of patriarchy as well. So it's all about recognizing it's not one or the other. It's combination of both.
Yeah, absolutely. I love the way you've articulated that, and I think you could come in and deliver the first module of my course because it's exactly almost very similar language that I use. Because I think, you're right. You've nailed it. It's the fact that they do coexist, and the responsibility that we therefore have for the privileges that we do carry, and the responsibility to do something that. You touched on it before when you talked about inclusion and the concept of inclusion, and I've kind of really been, I've had various periods over my career so far in this space where I've challenged the idea of inclusion as being challenged and what inclusion looks like. And I'd love us to maybe talk about this because there was a story I heard of an Aboriginal woman who was invited to a meeting between, I think it was an Islander and an Australian committee meeting, some committee doing something important, and they realised they needed to have an Indigenous voice at the table. So they invited this woman, and apparently, and this is a hearsay, this is a story, but apparently the conversation had gone on, and she hadn't had much of an opportunity to contribute. And they turned to her and asked her what her contributions were, and she said, I've been invited to the table, but this is the white man's table. Mm-hmm. And when you join me in a yarning circle on the floor, then we might be able to have this conversation and you might be able to hear my thoughts and my experience.
Yeah.
Can you expand on that? I'm sure you've thought about this as well.
It's a very interesting power dynamics that we can see working over there. And this is happen in diversity and inclusion all the time. The number of times that I've been asked to be involved, to lend my voice, to share my wisdom, and I quickly looked around the room and I found that I was the only one I was the only one that I can easily put the diversity checklist. Asian, Muslim, gay, queer, gender
Yeah.
diverse, whatever you want to take. And I was it. And the expectation is the expectation from the dominant group was for me to be able to share my wisdom and then fix it for them. That's unrealistic, and that's very dangerous, because if we really want to talk about diversity and inclusion, we really have to start listening from a range group of people. And for us to be able to do that, we need to dismantle power. So people in the leadership position need to understand that their position comes with power. It comes with influence. They are the ones who are able to dictate what to do, what to say, and the parameter that they want to work in. So I know that you've been working with this concept of inclusive leadership. So inclusive leadership, first and foremost, is to dismantle power. And that's really hard to do when we talk to a bunch of executives. Because in their head, they're thinking, I work hard to be here, I earn this, I do my best to be inclusive. And I keep challenging them and say, well, actually, you're doing your best to be here right now. But now that you have the position, what can you do to step back, to let go of that position, to let go of that power and privilege, to sit down on our level, the same way with us, and to establish dialogues, because dialogues is part of inclusion. We cannot create a systemic change without dialogues, because dialogues make us understand the kind of struggles, the kind of privileges, the kind of disadvantages, the kind of opportunities that's available. Then we start talking about those one by one.
Yep, absolutely. Now, I'm assuming the executives might quite often come back and say, I don't have time for that. I have to make decisions, and there's time frames and pressure on me, and I won't fulfill my job requirements if I sit down and spend these hours having a chinwag or having a conversation with a whole range of different people. How do you respond to that?
I was invited to a board meeting when I said to the board, you are responsible for the conduct of the CEO and the executive leadership team. Make it part of the KPI. Part of the KPI is to make sure that it is always on the agenda, that it is measurable, that they are talking about this, that they are going on, they are going down the level, and they really explore the impact that it can have when we don't practice inclusion, when we don't create an environment where people of different ethnicities, different race, different sexuality, gender identity, and all the other isms, when they don't feel that they belong. Because organizations all like to do this. They kind of said, okay, we recognize that we need to hire more, let's say, more LGBTIQ staff. So they put all these big kind of nice rainbow flags, come work with us, come work with us. People got in there, they felt that they belong for the first 6 months, and then things starts to fall apart. And that's where we kind of say, well, that's because people in power is not willing to actually go down on the same level as this staff that you want to recruit, and really explore. So what is it? What is it that we can do to make you feel that you're part of our workplace? Again, the ability to do that requires the ability to let go of power, and it has to be mandated by the board. The board has to say, this is part of your KPI. Yeah, we can send you to training, we can send you to seminars, but this is part of your KPI. No more excuses to say that you're too busy. This is your work. This is your job.
We've just had a great question come through from Amy. Hey, Amy. So can we fix it from within the system?
I would say that we can, and I have encouraged people to do it from what already exists. When I talk about intersectionality, the first comment usually, oh my God, do we have to start all over again? Is everything that we've done just basically not good enough, and then we just have to, we have to rebuild ourselves? Actually, no. Work with what's already exists. So if your workplace already have a gender equity strategy, have a look in that strategy and see and look at the staff. Okay, so we got gender equity strategy. We're able to attract more women to our workplace. What are the characteristics of the women that we attract? If you step back and realize most of them are white women from middle class, tertiary educated women, then we know there's an issue there. Hang on a second. Our gender equity is actually privileging one group of people at the expense of oppressing and marginalizing another group of people. So let's have a look at our racial and ethnic inclusion. If you have one, I don't know, organizations call it many different things. I'll just like to call it as a racial inclusion strategy. Have a look at those. Which kind of workforce do we attract from that strategy? If you find that it's mostly men, then you know there is a problem there. So it is about looking into the existing system. So you don't have to create a new system. You just have to implement a new approach. Have we included intersectionality in this approach? And when we start identifying gaps, that's when we know we actually need to talk to these people. What prevents them from coming to us? What do we need to change in our system to make it attractive for them and to make them stay? That's the number one thing that a lot of people forget. It's not just about attracting people to us. It's what we can do to make them stay.
Yeah.
And that requires a lot of analysis and a lot of soul searching as well. Am I compliant in the system of racism? Am I compliant in the system of sexism? So all of that combined needs a KPI. It really needs a KPI. Yeah. Otherwise, one person left and then the whole world kind of fell apart.
Yeah, exactly. No, I 100% agree with that. And I like that the issue of retention, to me, I always get surprised, and I shouldn't, but when I ask what if we can see their retention data, or do they know the retention statistics of their workforce? And way too often the answer is no. I don't understand organizations that aren't tracking that with respect to diversity, because quite often they will track retention statistics, maybe, but if they do, and they do demographics, it will be only women or men. They don't actually look into those retention statistics, which, as you say, are just so vital to understand if you are creating an inclusive environment.
Well, this is the thing, isn't it? Because this is my view, and please feel free to criticize me on this. My view is organizations somehow know that if they lose a minority staff from a minority groups, or with all the intersectionality, they know that they can easily replace that staff with someone else from that group. Because let's face it, all of us wanting to work, we are looking for employment. So in their eyes, it's like, oh, that staff left, and it's quite often it's being reduced down to a personal conflict, or it's just a personal conflict. That person just doesn't fit with our system. The person just doesn't fit for the organization. Oh no, that person is just being difficult. And we heard this over and over again. And it can take a while for organizations to realize actually our system is not equipped enough to support the staff. It's not equipped enough to create a sense of belonging. So let's look from the top. Let's look from the board. Who's sat on the board? If a board is full of people in power, white, middle class kind of thing, comfortable with financial and political access, then we have an issue. We have an issue because the trickle-down effect is very, very strong. So over and over again, we heard about people who wants to make changes from the ground. So they want to do the bottom-up kind of changes. But it comes to the middle level, and there's nothing happening there. So they're left disgruntled, they're left disappointed, they move on to a different position, different organization, and the same thing happen over and over again. So really, this is why I'm passionate talking about. Stop all this kind of recycling process. Let's talk about power system. Let's talk about systemic power system that creates a sense of exclusion, a sense of marginalization, and start looking at it from the top and how that's kind of how that transfer to people on the ground.
Yeah, beautiful. No, love it. This conversation is fantastic. I don't know. Let us know on the comments if you're enjoying it, because I'm just totally absorbed here. So all the questions that I've got written down, we haven't got to at all. Just found this just so incredibly compelling, and some of the key points that I've taken from the things that you've spoken about is what you were just talking about, that it is about board composition, but it's also about mandates from the board around the importance of demonstrating inclusive leadership and what that looks like. Going, as you say, having those leaders get down to the level of the staff and the employees, and particularly those from marginalised groups, and really unpicking and understanding what their experience is and what their solutions are to the particular issues that the business is facing. I liked your comment. It was a little side note, but calling your plan a racial inclusion plan. I don't see many of them, and this is something that I think it'd be nice to have another episode around, because we unpicked it a little bit when I spoke to Nivi and Shamala around the cultural diversity and how problematic that term is. I like that you've come up with a potential solution for people there that they can grab onto. So it'd be good to talk about that more at a later time. And the retention piece, I think, is really important. So thank you so much for coming on. We've got a few minutes left. I just wanted to quickly give a little plug for my inclusive leadership course. Sorry to do this to you, Budi, while you're on here. I'm going to have a new cohort go through in February. So some people have been contacting me to see when the next cohort will happen. That will start in February. So if you want to get in quick, get in before Christmas, do that. You can go to my website, which has testimonials on it. It has a little video, a bit of a snapshot. You can see what the course is going to entail and whether you might be interested or not. I'm so buoyed by the current cohort that are going through it, what I'm learning from them, but also what they're picking up and learning from each other and from the course. And, I'm hoping to just keep regularly improving that course based on all these wonderful discussions, but also on the feedback from those participants and their contributions. So they're kind of building the course as they go, which is really fun. So jump onto the website if you want to learn more about that. Budi, people can find you. Where can people find you?
Find me on LinkedIn, please. I set up my business name in a word that not many Anglo-speaking people understand. So I'm like, find me on LinkedIn. You tag me in your post, find me there, and that's the easiest thing to do. Otherwise, I have to spell it out.
Well, go and definitely connect up with Budi. I'm sure there's going to be some incredible things that you get up to in 2021. I know it's been a tough 2020 for all of those of us in diversity and inclusion. So I'm sure 2020 will be. I'm saying this with all the confidence that I have. It's going to be a lot better for us all. Right. So thank you so much, and thanks everybody for listening. Again, this will go up on YouTube. The captions will be on it. So if you want to share around, please do. I think there's so much that people can take from what Budi has shared with us today. And I will see you back in about mid-January, and we'll kick off with some really awesome guests. So tune in then and enjoy a break if you get one, the holiday season if you're participating, or just some quiet time to work, which I'm sure a lot of us are looking forward to as well. See you all later. Thanks, Budi.
Thank you.